Do I look like a scientist now? Or maybe a doctor? Have you ever wondered why scientists and doctors mostly wear white lab coats like this? You might say, obviously it's so that they can see the stains more easily. Sure, that's true, but that's not the whole story. White is not always even the safest color. Maybe Vanessa Doofenshmirtz was onto something. And who did it first? You'll find blog posts on both sides taking credit for this. But I did a deep dive so I can finally say with confidence, we're gonna settle this debate here in the first part of this video. And do lab coats even have to be white? You might be surprised to learn how many scientists wear other colors and why. I'll cover that in the second part of this video. And in the third part of this video, we'll look at some survey results that answer the question, what color do scientists actually want to wear? This is a story that includes a tragedy that led to Marie Curie actually changing the color of lab coat that she wore, all the way to modern scientists demanding new colors for both practical and aesthetic reasons. We're gonna nerd out in this one, so suit up. This story starts in the late 1800s, right after the American Civil War. Science was starting to gain credibility with the general population by solving real problems. What were they wearing though? Famous photos of these scientists actually show them wearing formal wear, like normal suits and ties. Louis Pasteur was painted in his lab wearing a normal suit and tie. Dmitri Mendeleev, the father of the periodic table, was photographed in 1886, also just wearing a regular coat. Even Marie Curie, famous for her work with radioactivity, often worked in long, dark dresses. One first-hand account said traditionally she liked wearing dark blue or navy dresses while working, but the one surviving dress from her wardrobe in the Marie Curie Museum in Paris is actually black. And photos of her later in life also show her only wearing black. So what happened? Well, in 1906, she lost her husband. In her mourning, she switched to wearing black and she never went back. So no white lab coats yet, and most of these aren't even lab coats. So while the prominent scientists of the time dressed nice for these photos, it was actually the lab technicians and the industrial chemists at big booming chemical companies like Bayer and BASF who were wearing protective smocks, leather aprons, long wool coats, or cotton coats in the lab at the time. They had to. These were actually extremely hazardous working environments. But these still weren't white. They were normally a tan, canvas color, black, maybe dark gray, similar to something you'd see a mechanic or a painter wearing at work. And although it's not hard evidence, it's been suggested that this portrait of German chemist Wilhelm Hofmann, taken around 1870, shows him wearing a brown laboratory coat. If it was a brown lab coat, it could possibly have been the first dedicated lab coat ever worn in an academic setting, at least that we know of. Meanwhile, medicine in the 1800s faced a massive identity crisis. Hospitals were places where people went to die, and doctors often wore black suits, more like undertakers than healers. One source from the time was quoted as saying, physicians dressed themselves in black until the late 19th century. Just look at this famous painting from 1875 by Thomas Eakins named The Gross Clinic. All the physicians here are wearing black. But then, everything changed. In the late 1880s, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch's germ theory started gaining traction, and antiseptics revolutionized surgery. Suddenly, cleanliness was important for survival. Doctors saw an opportunity to completely rebrand themselves. They began to adopt scientific practice and, crucially, borrowed from the scientists' protective garments. But with one major makeover. They chose white protective wear, the color of cleanliness and purity. One of the earliest visual records of this shift is Thomas Eakins' 1889 painting called The Agnew Clinic, showing surgeons wearing white for the very first time. Just look at the difference between these two. This painting helped update the public image of medicine. It implied, we're modern, we're clean, we are scientists. Okay, do you want some hard photographic evidence? That same year, photos from the Mass General Hospital also showed Dr. J. Collins Warren performing one of the first abdominal surgeries, once again in a white coat. In just 14 years or less, doctors had completed a huge makeover. It took scientists a little bit longer to get started wearing white. The earliest photographs of chemists and physicists in white lab coats appear around the early 1900s in German or British labs. Even then, it was inconsistent. Some wore aprons, some suits. But some of the first evidence is this image from 1902 of a neurobiological lab in Berlin. So who invented the white lab coat? This is one situation where you might actually want to name two first authors. Scientists were clearly wearing lab coats and other protective layers in the 1870s and 1880s before doctors did, but just not white ones. But by 1889, most doctors had clearly adopted white lab coats, at least during operations. Then, with prominent scientists and surgeons moving between fields and labs at the time, scientists started adopting white protective wear around the turn of the century. Even Marie Curie, famously consistent in her black dress, was photographed wearing a white apron over it in 1915. And by the 1950s, white was standard in just about every field of science and medicine. So while we will give scientists the credit for inventing the lab coat, doctors get the credit, or maybe the blame, for making them white. And that brings up another question. Do they even need to be white? And is white the best color, or were doctors wrong all along to choose it? So why is white so common? Well, the one reason that everyone repeats is that it's the safest color. Imagine you're doing a semi-hazardous chemistry experiment and you get a splash of yellowish reagent on your sleeve. Most lab coats won't actually repel it, but the important thing is that you notice, and it gives you a few seconds to take the lab coat off before it soaks through and maybe looks like this. On a white lab coat, it's instantly obvious and you're more likely to wash it right away. The same goes for biological fluids like a red cell culture media or blood in a microbiology laboratory. Plus, white coats are bleachable. You can hit them with high heat washes and strong disinfectants and they won't fade because, well, they're already at maximum fade. But what if you're working with a clear solution with white precipitate, or mice with white hair, or solvents that are colorless? In those cases, white no longer has the edge in contamination detection. There's something else you might not know behind the scenes. White is also the cheapest color. Cotton is naturally white, so you save a manufacturing step and you don't have to pay for the cost of the dye. On our black lab coats, the fabric cost is actually about 5% higher, and it takes about 3 days longer to produce it. Now, that doesn't mean that white is always the best choice. I've heard from some engineers and manufacturing people that they just don't work with anything truly hazardous. They need lab coats to keep their clothes clean and prevent their cat's fur from falling into their circuit boards. A navy or a black lab coat will look better long term if those oil, grease, or sweat stains don't totally come out in the wash. But listen to this argument between two people on Reddit. The first is a white lab coat purist, and the second is using a black lab coat in a less traditional line of work. The Reddit thread was about black lab coats, and the purist says, so you can contaminate the crap out of all your samples and never know why? Or do you just want to spill stuff on yourself and don't want to know where that rash is coming from? What kind of lab even approves this? But the black lab coat distiller said, I work in a distillery lab. It's more like a kitchen with complicated equipment. We're not even required to wear lab coats usually, so it's a bit like getting a pint spilled on you at the worst. And sometimes it's not just about contamination of your lab coat, but about cross-contamination control. Some larger labs actually use color-coded lab coats to differentiate between different work areas. It's especially common when labs do tissue cultures where cross-contamination is a huge risk. So I asked Reddit about this, and I got tons of responses. Here are two that explain it really well. Pies said, we have white for general lab work, light green for primary cell culture, blue for cell line work, lilac for visitors, disposable yellow coats for mouse work, and black would be pretty cool, to be honest. And another Redditor said, we have white for analytical work, blue for powders, gray for packaging work, and green for gels. You have to change clothes if you want to enter another section. And color coding isn't always for contamination either. Some teaching labs and larger companies use it to quickly signal like a job role or a status. One person from industry on Reddit said, industry here, we use white for bench scientists, blue for amplified post-PCR spaces, green for leadership, black for others like quality control and service engineers. And another Redditor said, at my school in chemistry teaching labs, students wear cheaper white lab coats and professors or lab assistants wear darker blue lab coats. The dark blue ones have better fire resistance than the white ones, but we also wear the dark blue ones in research settings, though it's not required. And one other person on Reddit had a great point. They said in their optics lab, they have FR lab coats which are dark blue, which they like those better because it won't scatter the laser as much as a white lab coat would if someone gets their arm in the beam. Now, the other side of that coin is that white reflects sunlight the best, so when I asked a customer in nuclear wastewater sampling if they were interested in our black lab coats, they said absolutely not. They have to go outside in midday in their lab coats to take water samples and would overheat really quickly in black. And one more thing you might not know. Have you ever heard of anti-static lab coats? Sometimes these are called ESD lab coats for electrostatic discharge. These have very thin black fibers called carbon suffused nylon woven vertically into them, and it conducts any static electricity the person builds up straight down into their grounded sleeves or shoes and prevents sparking when they touch any sensitive electronic devices. So if you don't like that pinstripe look, making the lab coat a dark blue or black would hide the conductive fibers a little bit better. So aside from contamination, you'll see a lot of scientists wearing blue lab coats for another safety reason. And it's all about the materials the lab coats are made out of. Now, I already explained a lot of this in another video, but it's worth restating really quickly. So most lab coats that are flame resistant or flame retardant, which is usually called FR, are either light blue, royal blue, or a navy blue. Some are cotton-based with FR coatings, and some use inherently FR aramid-based fibers, which can also have great chemical resistance. But this chemical resistance can also make them really difficult to dye them white. And so if you're a laboratory manager, knowing that every color of lab coat carries a different safety purpose, you can quickly call someone out across the room if they aren't wearing the right one for the work that day. It's also easier when laundry day comes because some of these have really special washing requirements. And here, I've actually got several samples of FR and chemical resistant fabrics from Westex, which is one of the best lab coat fabric suppliers in the world. I'll make a video about the differences is and how we choose which one to use in our next FR lab coat. But let me know in the comments, do you need FR, and what do you care most about in the fabric or the design of the lab coat? All right, so one more topic I want to cover. So we know why lab coats are traditionally white. We know why sometimes white is not always the best choice, but what colors do scientists and engineers actually want to wear? What are they like? Has anyone even asked them? So yeah, it's kind of weird to think that most lab coats have been designed with pretty limited input from the people who actually want to wear them. Sadly, that's the way it's been for a long time. That's why I started the lab coat project with a simple 10-minute survey. Lab coats are such a pain point that I was able to get over 1,500 responses, and I didn't even have to give away a bunch of Amazon gift cards for it. Researchers just really wanted the problem to be solved. I'll make a separate video about that, or you can see the top 10 takeaways from the survey in this blog post. But here's what they said about colors. So I actually asked scientists twice about their favorite colors of lab coats. In the Lab Coat Project's original survey in 2023, when asked what colors of lab coats they would love to wear, more than 60% of both men and women said they were actually just fine wearing white. But those identifying as other genders came in at less than 40%, signaling that they really wanted some more color options. Now, the second most popular color, to my surprise, was actually black. More than 25% said they wanted to go dark. Gray, light blue, and navy blue were also on the table at around 15 to 20%. And not too surprisingly, a lot of women wanted pink lab coats, but it was the least popular option for men. In the comments, a lot of people also wanted a lavender or a lilac option, or even printed patterns. And one day, maybe we'll even bring back that famous frog lab coat. Then in 2024, I finally decided we were ready to make a lab coat color other than white. And I wanted to double check that black was still popular by using a direct poll to our customers. And in this one, black killed it. So we went ahead and made our first color of lab coat in black. Now, I call it dark matter because I'm kind of a nerd like that. Now, in second place, no surprise, went to navy blue, but we're gonna save that one for our first FR lab coat so we don't cause confusion between the FR lab coats and the non-FR ones with the lab safety officers. Now, third place surprised me with dark green, followed by maroon and actually light purple. So if you want to wear a different color of lab coat, what do? I've got to warn you that if you search for more unique colors on Amazon, you'll find them. But these usually have extremely high polyester content and plastic buttons. And that's a huge fire risk if you work around flammable solvents, Bunsen burners, or exothermic reactions, because if there's an accident, it could melt and trap you inside. So be really careful with these. Now, one other option is to dye your own lab coat. Tie-dye lab coats, for example, are all the rage, especially with science teachers. But not all lab coats can actually be dyed at home. Did you know that polyester won't pick up the dye? You need a high cotton content lab coat, like the ones we make, if you want to dye these fun colors at home. We've already had customers dyeing our white lab coats black, green, and even pink. Now, just be careful with the dyes because some dyes can make the lab coats more flammable. So always check with your lab safety officer before modifying your lab coat. And of course, we're going to keep releasing new colors in 100% cotton. So if you're on our email list, you'll be the first one to hear about them. So now I'm asking you, what color do you want to wear most in the lab? Put it in the comments below and we might make that one next. Now, to answer our big question, does your lab coat have to be white? In most cases, no. The majority of lab managers would agree that while white is normally a good choice, other colors have a place too, including some real safety functions. Now, what truly matters is that your lab coat meets the needs of your lab and your safety, including that it's easy to see when it's contaminated. Flame resistance and chemical resistance take precedence in chemistry labs, and good fluid barriers are sometimes really important in the life sciences, and those matter much more than the color does. So take what you learned here today and see if you can go grab a different color to express yourself a little bit. If your lab coat meets your safety needs and has the right functionality, then you have a little room for changing up the aesthetic. It protects you, it helps you work, and yes, it can even look good. So Vanessa Doofenshmirtz did know what she was doing all along. Plus, we all do our best work when we feel good in what we're wearing, because science should be a little bit fun too, right? Now, if you want to get notified when we release new colors of our 100% cotton lab coats, including an FR version, make sure to subscribe to our email list using the link in the description. And thanks for watching.